Good morning. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. And this morning, I'm really honored to have with me as my guest, Murray Indick, who's a partner at Morrison & Foerster. Murray, welcome to the program.
Hi, Richard. Thanks for having me.
So, Murray, why don't you start by telling me why you went to law school in the first place?
I promised to do that, but do I get to take it out of order and do something unconventional on your podcast?
Please.
So, I bet everybody else on your podcast is very thoroughly prepared ahead of time. I was dressed just the way startup lawyers are typically dressed until about 20 minutes ago when I said, I probably ought to take a quick look and do a little bit of homework and see what do these things actually look like anyway. And I learned, my God, I better put on a button-down shirt. So I have a button-down shirt on for you today, sir, and for anybody who decides to take a look at this at some point in time. And this is a very, very special shirt for me. I'm going to answer your question, but can I just keep going for just 30 more seconds?
Please.
It's now almost 9 years ago to the date when I bought this shirt. And why am I telling you this story? I'm telling you this story because your listeners often have these last minute business trips that come up.
Yes.
And I had one in which I'm based in San Francisco, and I went down to Los Angeles to help what turned out to be the Los Angeles Clippers basketball team after the National Basketball Association had removed Donald Sterling as an officer and director of the club. People who are sports fans might remember that set of events. And I went down to Los Angeles for what I thought was the day of interviews with employees of the team and counsel for the NBA. And the day finished and the interviews didn't, because as your listeners may recall, this story went on for a period of months until the team was sold to Steve Ballmer. And I just had my, clothes on for the day and said to the chief financial officer of the Clippers, you want me back tomorrow? I don't have any clothes. And he said, well, there's a Macy's right over there. And so I went in and bought clothes so that I had fresh clothes for the next day, including this shirt, which is everybody can see is probably tattered and all the rest of it. But nevertheless, it sort of has a special memory for me. And I grabbed it to put it on for our time today.
Well, that's a great story. And I feel honored to be seeing you in that shirt.
Anyway, I decided to go to law school because from a fairly young age, my family thought that I talked way too much and thought that law school would be a good place for me. I'm sure you've heard that multiple times.
Actually, I haven't. That might be the first time. That was the sole reason?
That was the initial reason. The secondary reason is when I got to college, I also played a little bit of piano. And I fairly quickly came to the conclusion that I lacked the technique and the ear to make a career out of that, and thought the law would be a little bit easier.
Interesting. And did that prove correct?
It certainly proved correct. It certainly proved correct. I tinkle the ivories every now and then badly these days, I'm afraid.
Well, what made you decide to become a corporate lawyer? A lot of lawyers, a lot of people in law school thinking they want to be litigators, or they have these notions of, being a trial room lawyer. What about you?
Yeah, I was no exception to that rule. I'm old, as you can see, and was trained at the law firm that was then called Wilmer, Cutler and Pickering.
Of course.
This was in Washington, D.C. I got to the law firm in 1985 after clerking for a year and graduating law school. And Wilmer back in the day had a forced rotation system. I don't know whether it does anymore, and I don't know whether other law firms do. Maybe some of the Wall Street firms do. And my rotations included litigation and a regulatory practice or two, and also corporate stuff. And so it really evolved over an extended period of time. But I began thinking I was going to be a litigator, and as a fairly young associate, was involved in non-jury trials and motions practice and all the like. I think what happened for me in my early 30s, I looked around and concluded that, at least at Wilmer at the time, even when you became a more senior lawyer / junior partner, litigators often were pretrial lawyers. And I found that on the corporate side, people my age and even younger would be perfectly happy having me be the first chair lawyer equivalent on the corporate side. And I like that better. I very much like developing relationships with clients and friends and working with them in that regard.
And so then you switched to being corporate law, and it's been that way ever since, pretty much?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. I was very lucky. 26 years ago, I left Washington, D.C., and I left private practice, and I became a partner and general counsel at an investment firm here in San Francisco. For your San Francisco listeners, the firm at the time was called Blum Capital Partners, headed by Richard Blum, who passed last year, sadly. His wife is a United States Senator, Dianne Feinstein, again, for those who may recognize any of the names. And for 7 years, I was a partner in the general counsel at Blum. And then when I left Blum, I was part of another investment firm where, again, I was a partner and general counsel. And then I ultimately came back to private practice.
Interesting. So you were in-house for quite a few years.
13 years.
Oh, right. And how do you compare being in private practice versus being in-house?
So I loved both sets of experiences. And part of the reason why I told that long story about forced rotations back at Wilmer was I formed my own view that the best thing to do for me, and I think even now for young lawyers, was to try to have the broadest, most general set of experiences you possibly could. And as an in-house lawyer, I worked on everybody's deals and got exposure to everything. And when I came back to private practice at the age of 50, I was lucky to continue doing that. And so I think that the broader set of experiences that you can have either inside or at a law firm or both, the better.
What made you decide to go back to private practice after being so many years in-house? That's kind of unusual.
Yeah, well, it was more forced than anything else, Richard. Our investment firm had to shut down following the 2008 Great Recession. Our largest limited partner was withdrawing its capital, and so we sort of had a forced event. And then I was thinking about what I wanted to do next, and a very close personal friend of mine suggested that I come back and try private practice, and turned out to be really wonderful.
So what is your practice like today?
Yeah, so I am blessed with multiple vertical lines of business, and I'll talk with my hands if that's okay. The way I conceptualized it in 2010 was I was going to have two vertical lines of business that I would try and sit in between and sort of serve as connective tissue. One was what we think of these days as a classic Bay Area-based startup practice, company side and investor side. And the other, given my description about my investment firm, was a money-driven practice. So what I wanted to try and do on that angle was help people form investment funds, and then no white space between Richard, the founder of the investment fund, and Murray, and then help Richard deploy capital. And funds are always looking for places to put money to work, and companies are always looking for money. And so it struck me as and that's exactly the way it played out. Being able to help funds find places to allocate capital and helping clients find places for investments. Exactly right.
And is that work about 50-50? Is it about half fund formation work and half investment work, would you say?
These days?
Yeah.
So these days, I would say it's predominantly the operating company side practice as opposed to the fund formation practice. I think that's a slight function of sort of what the market's done for venture fund formation in particular in 2023. But even now, I continue to have a large number of venture fund formation clients, and they're, on fund 2 or 6 or something in between. And the question is when new funds will then be formed, and of course, a slower pace of capital deployment this year than in the past.
So before you went back to private practice, it sounds like you probably hadn't done much in the startup world. Is that true?
That is absolutely true.
Oh,
It's
interesting.
absolutely true.
Huh. And how did you kind of break into that, or how did you kind of decide that that's where you wanted to focus your client development efforts?
I was very, very, very lucky. That's not a humble brag. That's
Mm-hmm.
the God's honest truth. And I'll
Mm.
tell you, um, I wound up being connected in 2010 with this thing in quotes for these purposes, because now I'm going to tell you in a second, I'm not burying the lead, but at the time, Y Combinator was not as well known then as it is now. For
Mm-hmm.
those who play in the startup space, Y Combinator or YC is quite well known. And I got very, very lucky to become part of the YC community as, an outside counsel now going back 13 years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And through YC and others, I was able to grow a startup practice.
Interesting. And what kind of technologies do your startup clients give me a feel for the kind of technology? I assume they're mostly technology companies being in the Bay Area.
So for sure, although the practice is now global, and
Mm.
so for sure, lots and lots of tech companies, but life sciences businesses
Oh,
and
interesting.
consumer businesses, and truly anything that can scale.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a continuum between what people think of as a pure startup, perhaps, to what might just be viewed as a small business, and sort of where that line is drawn perhaps is based on growth or other sorts of metrics, right? I mean, the last handful of years, you've certainly seen lots of crypto companies that
Yeah.
qualify as startups. I don't know whether you think of them as tech. And so, it's you let your mind wander, right? It's sort of an endlessly large number of businesses that are being formed and capitalized.
Mm. So now you've been in house, you've had this successful private practice. What do you think could you ever go back in house again? Would you ever join one of your startup companies as a GC? What does the future hold for Murray Indick?
Oh, aren't you kind? Well, my wife probably says at some point in the future, the answer is retirement as opposed to. I'm quick to say you have to retire to something, not from something. I truly like running a very diversified practice. I like having company side work and investor side work. I mean, with, people from all over the world and all the rest of it. So I don't think the next step for me is going to be working only with one company. I could be wrong. Let's check back in a couple of years, but I don't think that's the likely future. I think the more likely future is probably reducing the number of companies I'm working with to something that's a little bit more manageable, because
Yeah.
right now it's quite a number of businesses that keep me busy.
Yeah. Well, Murray, I really appreciate your taking the time and telling me about your interesting career and your practice. If you do decide to do something else, please come back and tell me about it.
Will do. Thank you so much for the time, Richard.
This is Richard Hsu and Murray Indick. Thanks.